According to Hume, what we can know when we observe events in the world is that some events are constantly conjoined with other events. They regularly occur alongside other events. So regularly maybe that we've never seen them happen without the other events. To take our classic example, right? So here's the piece of chalk. If I were to let go of it, it would drop to the floor. Event A, I let go of it. Event B, it drops to the floor. We don't know that A causes B, Hume is arguing. What we do know is that A and B are constantly conjoined in our experience. And event B always follows upon A. Okay, and so he goes on in this kind of skeptical mode and this way of thinking. For instance, on the top of my page 22, this is in part 2 of section 4, about 3 or 4 paragraphs in, he writes the following famous lines. He says, "These two propositions are far from being the same." Here's the first proposition. "I have found that such an object has always been attended with such an effect." Here's the second proposition. "I foresee that other objects which are in appearance similar will always be attended with similar effects." Okay. Proposition 1, I have found that such an object has always been attended with such an effect. And proposition 2, I foresee that other objects which are in appearance similar will be attended with similar effects. What Hume is arguing there is that it is fallacious to reason from one kind of way of thinking, matters of facts, which deals with contingent truths, to a second kind of way of thinking, necessities, which are the characteristics of relations of ideas. Okay, so matters of fact, back to our old fourth distinction, matters of facts are only contingently true. Relations of ideas are necessarily true. And it is a fallacy to say, I have found that such an object has always been attended with such an effect. In other words, I have found that when this ball strikes that ball moves. It is a fallacy to say on that basis, such objects will be attended with similar effects. Okay? It's a fallacy to reason to necessity and to say that this is necessarily the case. Instead, what is not a fallacy is to say that these two events are constantly conjoined with each other. In other words, when such an object is always attended with such an effect, has always been attended with such an effect in the past, the right thing to say is such an object is always constantly conjoined with such an effect. That is the right way to describe what is going on. Okay, on page 24, my page 24, towards the end of section 4, Hume writes the following lines. "When a man says, 'I have found in all past instances such sensible qualities conjoined with such secret powers,' and when he says similar sensible qualities will always be conjoined with similar secret powers, he is not guilty of a tautology, because these are two different things." Okay, these are two different things. It is different to say that some state of affairs has always been the case in the past. It has always been constantly conjoined in a certain way. And on that basis, to predicate forward towards the future and to say all states of affairs all similar such states of affairs will always be similarly structured. Okay, that's a fallacy. Okay, the problem of induction, which is what Hume is describing here, is an age-old problem, and it lies at the heart of science. Okay, the problem of induction is just this. At the heart of science is an unprovable assumption that the future will resemble the past. It is an unprovable assumption about uniformity. Okay, scientists regularly assume that there is uniformity across temporal ages in science, and that laws of science, which have always been true in the past, laws of force, laws of matter and motion, will also be true in the future. And this is a problem that lies at the heart of science, because that uniformity assumption is unprovable. Because obviously we can't fast forward to the future, because it's always in the future. Once we have a future experience take place, it's no longer in the future, it's in the past. Okay, scientists, of course, also assume uniformity across not just temporal lines, but also spatial lines as well. Okay, so that's problematic also. The idea that certain kinds of scientific laws, because they hold here in this part of the universe, also must hold elsewhere. Well, we don't know that for certain. That's a problem of induction as well, something that can't be proven. Okay, if I reason to myself, I think the sun will rise in the east and not the west tomorrow, most of you, all of you, would agree with me and would say that reasoning is well-founded. Okay, it is grounded in empirical evidence. The evidence being, namely, that there are now thousands of instances in my life of the sun having risen in the east. It's always done it before. It's never risen in the west. So I have compelling evidence that this is the case. But if I were to say, on similar such lines, if I were to say, well, try this inference on. I have observed many people in life personally to have died. I have read about many people who have died. I have watched movie scenes of many people who have died. And it's never been me. So I must not die. That would be obviously a fallacious assumption, but it's based on the exact same reasoning. Okay, it's based on the exact same reasoning where a bunch of instances are assembled. And on the basis of those instances, you then predicate a general law which is expected to apply in the future because it's always been the case in the past. Okay, it's based on the exact same reasoning as the reasoning that led me to conclude that the sun will rise in the east tomorrow. And it's a problem at the heart of science, because at the heart of science is the idea that you assemble evidence from observations, all of which have occurred in the past, and you predicate general principles which apply to the future as well as the past. And you say that these general principles must be generally correct across all circumstances. Okay, this is a famous philosophical example of this, right? So the chicken is fed gruel by the farmer every morning. This has happened now in the chicken's life several hundred times. The farmer shows up, the chicken thinks to himself, I'm about to get gruel this morning. But this happens to be the day that the farmer comes to wring the chicken's neck. The chicken was a bad scientist. The chicken assumed, on the basis of evidence, a large body of evidence, that he knew what the farmer would do. But this, in fact, turned out to be the day that the farmer did not do that. Okay, and that's sort of a problem. The problem of the chicken's assumptions is an embodiment of the problem of induction. And it's the reason why Hume was considered such a dangerous thinker for so long is because it's a stab into science that asserts that science is based on unprovable assumptions, which can never actually be shown to hold. Okay, this is a really abstract topic. I hope I haven't confused everyone with this topic. Is everyone kind of following? Do I have any questions or comments? Does everyone see the importance of the topic, I hope? Yes? Yeah, so it's a little more than that. The little kid who you're trying to convince not to stick her finger in the electrical plug hasn't had an accumulation of evidence. The 39-year-old like me, I can't believe I'm almost 40. It will happen to you, and you, and you, and you. And you will look back and you will say, this was all really fast. Because it's really short, it really is. Okay, so the little kid doesn't have an accumulation of evidence, but I have now seen or heard of many people who have died. And it's never been me. And so if I reason on this basis, here are a bunch of instances of death, and it's not me, so it must not be possible for me to die. It is the exact same kind of reasoning as I'm using when I say, here are a bunch of instances of the sun rising in the east, and it's never risen in the west, so it must not be possible for the sun to rise in the west. It must rise in the east. And in one case, the sun rising in the east, we would consider that legitimate, defensible reasoning. But in the other case, the case of everybody else dying, so it must not be me, we would consider that to be illegitimate. And Hume's point is simply that actually it's the same structure. The reasoning is the same structure. And so more generally, scientific principles all are predicated on the basis of uniformity assumptions, which are indefensible. Okay, does everybody kind of follow that? Is that good? All right, other questions? That's a good question. For Hume, there is a solution to this. And the solution is we need to stop believing in the false idea that science gives us certain knowledge, because it doesn't, he says. Science gives us knowledge about matters of fact, and as such it is a contingent truth and not a necessary truth, which is something that only occurs in the realm of relations of ideas. Okay, for Hume, the answer here is custom or habit. And I'm reading on my page 28 in section 5. He uses these two words interchangeably, custom and habit, to describe what actually is happening when we have experiences of matters of fact. This is a complex sentence on page 28, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. Actually, let me skip that because that'll just confuse you. Let me read this on page 29, top of page 29. He says, custom then is the great guide of human life. It is that principle alone which renders our experience useful to us and makes us expect for the future a similar train of events with those which have appeared in the past. Without the influence of custom, we should be entirely ignorant of every matter of fact beyond what is immediately present to the memory and senses. We should never know how to adjust means to ends or to employ our natural powers in the production of any effect. There would be an end at once of all action as well as of the chief part of speculation. Okay, so what he's saying there is that, look, the way humans actually operate is by means of mental custom or mental habit. And that's the basis for your knowledge, is you have assembled a whole bunch of instances, your experiences, and on that basis your mind has formed a habit. And that habit now leads you to believe that future examples will resemble past instances. Okay, so tomorrow, when you hold an object and let go of it, if you think about that future event, almost certainly we would say, well, I know that it's going to fall to the earth. Okay, and you say that because of custom, because of mental habit. It is just mental habit that grounds the sciences. It is mental habit that grounds our observations of the natural world, and that is the resolution to the problem of induction for Hume. Scientific laws, then, are not certainties. They are mental habits. Okay, they are mental habits. Because scientists are historians who have assembled a series of historical instances and have predicated on that basis generalities about the nature of the world. Okay, questions or comments about Hume's solution? Do you agree that this is, in fact, a correct characterization of the way human beings operate and of the way they should operate? The way human beings' minds, I guess, operate is what I should say. So if I were to tell you, look, something crazy happened this morning. I was holding chalk in my hand, and I let go of it, and it flew up to the ceiling. Would you say, well, that sounds legitimate? Would you say there's got to be a secret explanation for this that you don't know about? Because that can't be what would just normally happen to that. Right? The latter, right? You'd say the latter, wouldn't you? Why would you do so? Tell me why. Because gravity exists? No! Because that's an assumption that gravity is a necessity, right? Okay, so as a Humean, let's put our Humean glasses on. As a Humean, why would you say that that must have been, there must be a secret explanation? Because it's never happened before. Yes, that would be the Humean response. Is it's never happened before. This isn't a seriously out of the ordinary experience. Okay, for Hume then, because of the principle of custom or habit, what we need to do when we encounter the world is we need to proportion our belief in accordance with the probability of the event in question. Okay, so I'm going to draw a probability scale here. Okay, this is going to be my effort to do this. Back in the day, they had like physical scales, and merchants would weigh things on their physical scales long before our digital versions. Okay, we'll say there are different weights here. And we'll say the heavier weight, actually I shouldn't have drawn them equal. Revision, okay? The heavier weight is on this side, the lighter weight is on that side. And for Hume, the balance of probability, wherever it is heavier, determines what we should believe and not believe in terms of our knowledge. Okay, so if the evidence is weightier for one result rather than another, then we should believe the side where the evidence is greater, rather than the side where the evidence is less and not as statistically substantive. Does this seem like a good principle to go through life as you live your life? Believe whatever is more probable in accordance with the number of instances that you have observed of a particular phenomenon? Yeah, we do naturally do that, don't we? It is kind of the way intuitively most people approach life. Okay, right, so the proverbial woman who's gotten cheated on by first her boyfriend and now her husband says to herself, all men are liars. I have evidence for this. The probability suggests it. Is she reasoning cogently? Well, she's had some experience. Based on her experience, I suppose this is a conclusion that is somewhat supported. She hasn't, of course, had a really large sample size to deal with. So there are lots and lots of other men. Maybe they're not liars, like the ones that she's encountered. But where the evidence base is really great, like a lot of instances of something, most people would agree with Hume and would say, yeah, there you should believe that whatever has the balance of evidence in its favor is the best explanation. That's the more likely solution. Okay, here's why I press this point. In 33 AD, in Palestine, a teacher who had assembled a band of followers was executed by Roman soldiers, was buried, and then after a night and a day and another night had passed, was said by a number of people to have risen again. Like, here this dude was dead, carried into a cave in the side of a mountain, and now he's walking around again. This is an incredibly improbable event. The most famous miracle story of all time. Far and away, the central, crucial fact of Christianity. Okay, now, a lot of people have died over the centuries, over the millennia. A whole lot of evidence is weighing the scale, suggesting that there's another explanation for this miracle story than that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead. So should we believe that there's an alternative explanation here? Or should we believe that this miracle story is not just a story, but is in fact true? This is a central factual claim of Christianity. Okay, it's something that I believe. It's something that I've staked my life on, that I live in accordance with. Is this factual claim that some dude 2,000 years ago died and then a couple of days later was walking around again. If this story is false, then Christianity is false. If it is true, then Christianity is far and away the most important thing that we human beings could possibly ever encounter in our lives. What do we make of that? If we use Hume's reasoning, then we should not believe the side that the evidence doesn't favor. And the evidence quite clearly is against this being a true miracle, because if you look in history, the vast majority of the millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people who have died over the years have not risen again. So what do we make of this? Is Hume wrong? Is it a general principle that sometimes breaks down? Okay, it generally works that you should believe the side that has the greater number of instances on it until one day it doesn't, because there's an anomaly that it can't explain. What do we make of this? Well, I haven't had any personal experience of anybody rising from the dead.
Oh, no.
Oh, you're talking about...
Yeah, I don't have it.
Okay. All right, that's cool, that's cool. Anybody else? I appreciate I'm getting some eye contact from people. It's not normal on some questions like this. Okay. Okay, so this is an anomaly. And so Hume's way of thinking, where you weigh the evidence and you like believe whatever side of the scale has the most instances backing it, is a way of thinking that works until it encounters an anomaly and then it doesn't work anymore. And in this particular case, Jesus of Nazareth, I personally believe Jesus of Nazareth has a dual nature, is divine and human, and that's an anomaly. It's a serious anomaly, actually. Okay, anybody else? What do you think?
It's like the person surviving a lightning strike.
Right?
Every other, besides the odds of that happening, every other person didn't survive.
Right, yeah. So you should believe, Hume would say, well, what you should believe in a case like that is probably he didn't get struck by lightning. Like there's some other explanation. But Hume, it's a way of thinking that works until it doesn't, because actually some people do survive lightning. Right? And I believe that miraculous events do occur. I think they're really rare. And when Hume says that the balance of evidence is always against a miracle's occurring, so you shouldn't believe that miracles occur because the balance of evidence is always on the other side, I guess I'd agree with him that the balance of evidence is always against the miracle. The balance of evidence is against the miracle that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead. But it doesn't prove that there aren't anomalies, that there aren't miraculous events that do happen. Crazy, out of the ordinary things that Hume's method works for until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, it fails to explain. Okay, so just to take an example from a very different field than first century Judaism, right? So you guys know, of course, that COVID shut the country down starting last March. I had never lived through personally anything like that. And I'd read about pandemics from previous centuries. So I guess I knew theoretically in an abstract way what that would be like. But actually living it was a novel experience. And there was nothing in my previous life experience that I could draw upon to understand what was going on. It was an anomaly. It was an anomalous experience. And I guess I would say, as an assessment of Hume's custom or habit principle, that most of the time it works. It works until it doesn't. Most of the time it works as a way of approaching life. Yes, most of the time you should base your belief in the truth of something on the balance of evidence and the number of instances that support a particular side of the particular explanation of the phenomenon. Most of the time you should do so, until you shouldn't, when anomalies happen, like the pandemic that happened, that I had nothing in my personal experience that prepared me for what was taking place. Okay, or like miraculous events, or some other such phenomenon. Okay, we're going to talk at greater length about that topic, and in fact, actually, Hume devotes section 10 of the inquiry to the topic of miracles and of the supernatural in human life. That will be on our agenda over the next week or two. Are there any questions or comments about any of these ideas from today? Okay, then. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. It is good to see you.